How you doing, everybody? What's up, internet? It's been a while, and we're doing a live video today per request by Mr. Genos. He's got a 2002 Camaro, and we've been working with him a while on what he's wanted to do, and he selected a level 2. You guys know that I posted a video, or not a video, a little photo album previously, and it was actually a big hit. So today on video, we'll kind of show you what all went into that. Our level 2 is the best bang for the buck that we offer. It holds 700 horsepower, wheel horsepower in a car. In a truck, I'd say a little bit less, but most people have pushed it well beyond its limits, and we sell hundreds of them a year. So this video is for Alan. It's not so much about us, and instead of more so showing you a how-to, we're gonna show more what we're doing to make this hold his power this time, instead of you know, all the little nuances it takes to assemble it. So jumping right into this, we have our case here, and you know, selected a nice one here for Alan, and our classic paint job. Done a lot of things prior just to speed things up. Nobody's going to want to sit here for 8+ hours watching me do little bushings and stuff. So bottom line is, prior to the video, low piston seals are done, bushings done, a couple things are greased, everything's cleaned up, been meticulously inspected as good as we can do it. You know, we've checked for leaks in the pump and the vacuum, or valve body, looked at all the hard parts, the gear wear patterns, stuff like that. Just a broad overall, give it the good once over. So right now, I guess I like to work my way, and I like to clear stuff off my desk that isn't really necessary, as long as I, you know, right in the beginning, so I have room to work. So starting off by putting his wiring harness in, and that's gonna just simply clip in. Then I flip it around on my hook. Now the next part, I guess we'll do this bottom up, and we're gonna start with ring gear, rear ring gear, and the bearing. Little assembly goo. And give it a spin. As always, check your action. Now, I was getting a couple questions over the past few months. You know, I kind of keep everything in the back of my head, and a lot of these, you know, the photo album which I posted of our level 2, some people were asking about the 4-pinion planets, and my answer is, you know, they were all curious that they would hold 700, and truth be told, yeah, they will, and maybe a little bit more. You know, these are great, and even a worn out 4-pinion is better than an overseas 5-pinion, if you get what I'm saying, if you're familiar with it. I like to think of this section that I'm building now as the body. This works together as a team in the center, and then more importantly later we have the pump and the valve body, which are kind of the heart and brains of the operation, and they're like a whole separate team. But when you get these guys and those two guys working together, we have a recipe for 700 horsepower. Easy done too, easy done. Okay, next up, we use some Borg Warner high energy low reverse steels, and just standard steels, and you want about a steel's gap clearance. Doesn't need to be uber tight. And we'll start with our wave and follow up. and we're just going to cruise right along. A couple of the other things while I'm assembling, you can listen to me ramble. Bushings, something I did previously prior to the video, and this transmission in its body, the part that I'm assembling, if you notice, there is no center support. There's no bolt-on, no bolt-in center support, like a lot of the other GM and Ford transmissions and all that. And that being said, it makes it heavily reliant, this unit is heavily reliant on all the bushings. So that's a kind of a major step that's a little bit looked over in the transmission world, I feel like, and it's just extremely important, seeing as the stuff in there isn't actually fastened in the middle. So we landed with a clutch, and we're going to put in our spring clip, a little bit different than a case saver. This is just stock OEM, but it does the job. A case saver is just a preventative thing, more or less. It doesn't make the unit any stronger. But here's our low roller OEM, and this pretty stout piece. These don't really break, and it does go in a certain way. Just like that. Everything's looking beautiful, sliding right in. Clip also goes in a certain way. Don't let it touch that spring clip. Get some funny noises if you do. Now the next part here, this is our sun gear, and we do a wide bushing here, as you can see. Very nice. And that is that goes back to kind of the center support thing I was talking about. Technically, that's what it is, and it ain't much, but the more you can build the area around it and strengthen it, the better it's going to hold up. Well known here, we have our beast. Okay, this is a very stout, probably the best sun shell, you know, for the overall build that I can tell you to provide. The Sonax Smart Shell is awesome. That comes in our level 3. It's balanced, but to be honest, this is pretty strong. This is a must-have. Check your action, everything spins nice, and that just sets on top of your sun gear there. And the next piece would be the reaction tube front ring gear. And again, the bushings, the surface here, a bearing style is really nice. I firmly believe in everything should be as free moving as possible, and even though a washer is all good and everything, I just feel like this is a little bit better. You know, it just makes sense. But the washers, they do last forever. So we'll be plugging this in next. A little Vaseline assembly lube will help this go on nice and easy. And you want to make sure we have a clockwise, and then counterclockwise is kind of locking, and everything just should be very, very graceful and nice. Here's our centerpiece today. What's special about this build is we have the Sonax, flip to scene 1. We have the Sonax 284 reduction here, and they provide us with a extra wide gear here to work with it, and this is just a really beautiful, nice piece. Extremely well put together. A couple facts about it. It's not any stronger, even though it looks really badass and super sweet. It's not really any stronger than the 5 pinions but it does really work well with anywhere between a 373 to 410, 411 rear. It was actually designed for a 410 rear. That's what it does work best with. But anywhere from 373 to 411, this might be for you, especially if you're looking at 60-foot times, 1,000-foot, etc. This really does help. It makes a difference. Everybody I've ever put one of these in raves about it. So we can add this to any level you want for $600 difference. And like I said, any transmission we build, level 1, 2, 3 in black, we can do anything with it. You know, we can put this in, we can put a brake on it, whatever you guys want to do. We'll make it work here at Performabuilt. So, a little assembly goo again. And if you do buy this and you are doing this little add-on yourself, they do come with directions on a certain type of reaction tube to use, and you got to do some measuring. Depends on the model year of the 60 you have, but it cannot use a later style with a cup bearing. It's got to use the older stuff. That's just how they built it. So we're going to throw that in. Beautiful. Look at that. I feel like Gordon Ramsay. That looks so nice. I'm like cooking up a storm here. So once you've plugged in your 284 or 4-pinion or 5-pinion front planet, you have your output shaft, and self-explanatory. We use a stock one pretty much all the way up to the level 3. The black edition, we do some billet stuff, but we have guys doing wheelies left and right, and if you set your transmission up correctly like we do, there's no reason you shouldn't be pulling the tires with a 60. I mean, I think at least 75% of our customers are pulling the tires off the ground. So it all comes down to not too hard and not too soft a shift. I was looking for my bungee strap. This is a handy little tool to put this in. So that should slide up, nice tight fit. And the bungee strap, its purpose is to hook the bottom, wrap it around the hook, and hold it in place so you can be extra lazy with it. No need to have 3 or 4 extra hands trying to hold that in, get the clip in, and everything else. Alrighty. Once we got that done, we go back to checking the action, and it should be just like that. Give it a nice firm spin. Everything should work together. Minimal noise, you know, minus that it's a little dry right now. There's not lube. But other than that, she should be nice, quiet, working together, no drag, beautiful. And I'm going to jump a little bit ahead, but Sonax gives you this special gear here, and it's a little bit bigger. When you go to do your forward Spragg, I like to use a type that doesn't have these little notches to hold the gear in, the stock gear. This type simply just put it in. And instead of trying to get that other gear out, then messing with the tabs so it doesn't rub on anything, it's a mess. This makes it easier. So before you forget about this, go ahead and put that in, and it should look just like that. And if you want, throw a little goo just to help it help its initial run on the dyno. There is a small period where, you know, it takes a little time, but it's usually pretty instant. We're going to go ahead and start putting together Alan's input drum right now, and this works highly in conjunction with this stuff. And like I said, the valve body and pump are kind of separate, but we'll get to that, and they're equally as important. I mean, this is like teamwork to the max, and if you get everything right, you know, this transmission is going to last you a very long time. You can beat the snot out of it, and you don't have anything to worry about. It'll just take it. So we have our Spragg gear here, and again, back to what I said, surfaces here are important. This is basically a big bearing and a big bearing race. So thin layer of goo, thin layer of goo, and then our ever famous Borg Warner dual cage Spragg, strongest you can get. There is a later style. It's a plastic metal type Spragg. It is a little bit wider, but personally to me, kind of unnecessary. This thing does the job, and it's been doing the job well above 1,000 horsepower for us for as long as we've been using it since it came out. We also do a few things here at Performabuilt that I've never really talked about, and I'm not going to divulge into details, but we help support this. So in essence, we're doubling the strength of it. So it's not working alone, and that's why I keep talking about this teamwork stuff here. Everything helps itself out and works in conjunction with the other part. It's very important to us, and that's why we have so much success with this unit, to make it work that way, because this alone isn't enough. It needs help. So easy done there. It's a little clip. All right, we'll set that aside. That's not going in until a little bit later. Right now we have our first step, anyway, would be our piston set for the bottom section of the drum. And this is what applies all your clutches. We don't use any of the aluminum with the lip seal type pistons. They're total garbage, and we just throw them away. But what we do is use all molded pistons. So your first would be your 3/4 piston. To me, this is probably the most important, and the reason is because it is a small piston. That's a fact, and it applies an extremely large clutch pack in a very stressful gear. And you know, everybody knows about the 3/4 burn up and all that. That's something we don't really have a problem with, because it's more than just a clearance thing and how good everything fits. It's much more than that. But some basis on it, a little background, is like any seal in a transmission, it is extremely important that, you know, that's a very tight fit. We're asking a lot of it for what it is. The next thing is our 3/4 apply crown here, spring cage, and our forward overrun assembly. And I like to do this as a assembly when I put this in. This is one of those things that you can't really do piece by piece, especially your forward pistons here. So I assemble it all together like this. I have a little plastic device here that just makes sure none of the lip seals get caught around the base, and everything slides down just smoothly. So you line up your tabs and then give everything a nice firm push, and you'll feel a little bit of spring back, not a whole lot, but a little. And then you'll get into your overrun piston here. This one, not too bad to put in. It does have a lip seal, but the way they've made the forward piston with a bevel, it's not too bad to install. It's kind of easy. May just take a little coaxing. In our level 3 in black edition, we use a billet overrun piston in place of this, and it works with the sleeve kit, and it's a little bit better of a setup, but this definitely handles 99% of what most people can throw at it. And then we have our return spring and our clip. This is going to come over and get compressed. Now, unfortunately, you couldn't really see that, but it's kind of important that clip's touchy. It should go in pretty easy. Use your foot press to work with it, but it's very important not to stretch it out too much. You know, just enough to get it over into the groove. So we have that. Our piston assembly is assembled. I'm going to start layering the clutches. Lots of little parts like I explained previously. Let's put them in first. That way we don't forget about them. That's your Spragg bearing. And after that's in, got some good looking overrun steels here. So we're going to start on the very bottom with the steel, overrun clutch steel, overrun clutch, and the apply plate. Now, those were some Borg clutches, and that's what we use. We like Borg Warner. Our level 2 gets Borg Warner here, Borg Warner there, Borg Warner in the 3/4, everything but forward. These are Allomatic carbon. We've been using these from the get-go, and they are the best forward clutch, in my opinion. I've seen these with 10-year-old transmissions, and they still look brand new. And yes, quite recently we've gotten a few 10-year-old units in, and I'm pretty impressed with these. Got some new forward steels here, and our forward wave plate, easily confused. So after your overrun apply plate, we do the wave steel, and then now is when I take the opportunity to put the forward Spragg in. Purely because you guys have heard me talk about it. It's a little bit easier to shake it in with 2 clutches rather than 7. And then our forward plate with our thick snap ring here. And then simply work that in with the screwdriver. Try to get the gap in between two of the lands. That way it's not partially on one. You know, this clutch is always applied in drive, and if it ever does flick off one of those tabs, you'll have some serious trouble. So that's a good way to prevent it. I'll, if my guy goes back to scene 3, I'll pick this up. You guys can have a nice look at that. Gorgeous, right? Nice. All right. Now we have our 3/4. Famous 3/4, all right? We're using board clutches, as you can see here. Very nice. We're using an 8 clutch set, and I'm doing something a little bit different with the steels. So we're not using a thin steel. I don't really know what the measurements are off the top of my head, but the stock steels are the thickest. So when I say stock, that's the thickest. So we're using one just under that, and then in the middle we're using a very thick steel. This helps the rigidity of the clutch pack. You know, when this piston comes up with fluid, it's got some rock to it, you know, so there is a little bit of flexibility in here, but not a whole lot. We don't want too much. So starting off, this is a nice HD 3/4 plate here. Something important to remember is this thing should just sit. You know, if you got to push it down or there's any kind of wobble in it, you need to look something over. And you know, your crown surfaces, they might not actually be flat. So things to look at. And we're just going to layer this up. Clutch steel like we always do. Now I'm going to get this, you guys have watched me do it live before, but I'm going to get this right the first time because I already did it prior to the video. So what we have here, and what you will be looking at, is a 20 thousandths clearance. Once it sets, it might still be 20, it might be 30, but I wouldn't say any more. And then we have our apply plate. One of the questions I was getting also recently on my last couple posts was these little return springs. Yes, we do use them, and we just use a little bit modified of a return spring. They don't crush and stay. They don't lose their, I don't know what to say, springiness. Even if this thing burns up, they will still be very, very nice. And this prevents centrifuge, which is a real thing, and I really disagree with not using them. I know some people might claim to have pulled it off, but I feel like they just got lucky. That's my only explanation for that. And then we'll just set our apply plate up and place your gap on one of the cages. Again, preventing any flick of a tab off the drum and a serious failure. A little TLC, you know, making sure the spring cages, move your clutches, everything's pushed back against the drum. So that way when you're spinning it, you know, hundreds of thousands of RPM here, well, not hundreds of thousands, but you know what I mean, nothing is gonna like grind into each other. You know, these clutches are extremely sensitive. So we have a nice motion, hardly any bump. So this is gonna create that firm, progressive shift that everybody who's ever had one of our units constantly raves about. This is gonna keep you just going down the track. I mean, there is no get. The best video is Steve in his Camaro. He was blowing through his converter a little bit, but I mean, he was on it. So this is the rocket ship shift, is what I would say is the best way to describe it. So I'll hold that up to the camera so we can take a take a gander here. It's very hard to hold this, but as you can see, it's very free moving as best I can, and there is little to none, but it moves very, very nice. So flipping that over, normally I'd run through and air check this, but I already did that. I'm not going to waste my time, but that's a good thing to do once you assemble your clutches. Also, when you're trying to get your clearance right, the spring cages help with your clearance, and so does air checking the drum a little bit. It helps compress them. Clutches do compress, so does the band. You know, it stretches. Everything has its own Newton's law in this unit. I've pre-selected some clearance washer and bearing. I'm using a 69 today, and they range from 67 to 72, and it's not too sensitive on a 60. I mean, pretty much if this thing turns, it's got end play, but you'll know what's too much and too little. So put our washer on and do our Teflon rings. There are 4 of them, and specialty tool required here. So this is a bit of a this is a little bit of practice here, but you don't want to stretch these out on this piece too much. Otherwise, you're going to fight a little bit trying to get them to shrink back together. It's kind of a just enough thing, not too much, not too little. That goes along with a lot of the stuff in this unit. So normally, to be safe, you would put one on, take this off, size it, etc., etc., rinse and repeat. I'm just going to do all 4, and we're going to call it good. And with your fingers and thumbs, you would just want to work that over. And as you go up, it will take less and less time on the sizer to actually put these on. And this one is almost instantly the first ring. Set that back over there. Give your rings a little pinch. And then up and down a few times, really nice and easy, just to make sure, because you can just clip one right off. But here we are, 4 sized rings, and very nice, solid rings. I do not like the split or scarf cut. The solid rings on the input shaft are definitely the way to go. Drum's done. We're going to set it to the side. Next up, something I really haven't done in a very long time in a video is show everybody how to put together a reverse input drum. Not too complicated, but definitely a skill when it comes to these lip seals here. Clearance in this is not important unless you are doing a trans brake, and not many people do those for the 60, but we do. I want to make that known. So unless a brake, clearance isn't important. If you're using a brake, this is definitely one of the big players in that setup. Okay, we have our bare bones drum here and our lip seals. As you guys know, fluid comes this way, lip seals need pointed this way. The most important part about this drum, as this, I've been kind of doing a little bit of how-to and a little bit of what we do, but as far as what we do, this drum has its own couple functions. One is reverse, and then the other is your 2/4 band surface. And it's kind of important that you use a new drum on a build. If you are rebuilding yours and it isn't that bad at all, then sure, you can go reuse it. It's not something you have to replace every time, but when we're doing performance, yeah, we do have to replace it every time, you know. Partly being so, mostly, in the OEM band takes up maybe 50% of the surface. It's not a lot. They are not utilizing the rest of what could be. So in order to utilize the full drum surface and all of its surface area and holding, we use the wide red band. Okay, one of the best bands there is. I think it's very comparable to the black carbon band, but this is a extremely awesome band to use if you're building your own or any build. Even if you're not beating the snot out of your transmission and you're rebuilding it, go for it. It's cheap, inexpensive, and it's a great second, fourth gear holding, and anything's better than OEM or what they did to these. So take a straight edge, make sure this is flat, you know, that way this can work properly. Back to the drum. While I was chatting away there, I have both my lip seals installed, inner and outer, and grease is definitely going to be your best friend with this. You want a little on the inner and a little more on the outer. The inside is not too hard to get down. The outside is a little bit more challenging. Okay, we'll set that down, and this is the tool. It's a flimsy little green disc, but it works extremely well. So with any piston in a drum, you would start in the center until it drops past the snap clip seal. And the real challenge here is the exterior. You'll push in the center with your two fingers and give it a rock as you're going around it. And the opposite spot when it comes up is the spot you bring the disc back around and then push it down. Otherwise, very smooth. Do not fight this one. This is something that you can't be rough with at all. Next thing to do is our spring cage. And pretty self-explanatory, just like the input drum here. A little bit easier than the input drum. The clip's not as stout. Okay, then we have our wave plate and a steel. And then we'll do clutch seal, clutch seal. I think I mentioned it previously, but even in the reverse section, we use Warner clutches. top apply plate and snap clip. And your thickness in the drum should be about the same as your reverse section, about a steel. Should be a thunk, extremely free moving, which is important because this drum is moving at a much faster rate than this or anything in there. So if these are rubbing at all, they're just going to get smoked in probably about 10 seconds. So it's extremely important that this isn't tight. Next, we combine these two. This is the extent of the drums. I mean, we've got our hard parts, our drums. These guys are working together, and they are totally relying upon what these are telling them what to do and how much. So give it a shake, and it'll land all the way down on the bearing. Even though it truly doesn't ride on that bearing, it'll just appear that way. Once you make contact with the sun shell, this picks it up just a little bit, you know, just enough. So we'll take our whole assembly, we'll leave our ring sizer on for a couple more minutes, as it does take time for them to size up and everything. So give them 10 minutes or so. Take our assembly, place it in, and sometimes I've gotten cocky and was able to do it with my hands. To make it easier on myself, I have a junk converter tool rebar thing that we've made, and we shake it in. It's just a little bit easier. And while you're doing this, you kind of pick up on it at a cockeyed angle, and you know, just ease it in. Everything should just turn. There should be no dragging of clutches or anything. This build's really looking good so far, and I hope Alan's very happy with it. You know, if possible, and when you get this and get it in, shoot us some pictures or something. Video would be nice. And again, for the guys out there watching, if you have bought one of ours and you are proud of your ride, and you know you're doing a burnout or whatever and it was pretty cool, send it to me. I will feature it. I'll be more than happy to. A little description of what you got, and we'll watch those likes roll in. Here we have putting in our 2/4 band. And secure it with your anchor pin. So we just have a nice loose band in there. Coming back out of the transmission, we have another big deal here. Again, with the reverse drum surface, the wideness of the 2/4 band, and now we have our super hold second and super hold fourth customized with the Performabuilt logo on it. Pretty red color. Red is fast. Let's not deny that. So we have a bigger area in the fourth. We have a much bigger surface area in second, and we have a bigger area here. Do the simple math. We are multiplying holding power by tenfold rather than an OEM setup. So in essence, we are amplifying everything about this transmission. The OEM transmission, the hydraulics starve it. There just simply isn't enough, and that's why they only hold 300 horsepower, and that's if you daily drive it. You beat on it, it's over. With this, we dare you to break it. We say it right on our website. And what I'm doing is I took the clip and everything off my Sonax pin. This is a great another great item. If you know you have a heavily used case, or you've rebuilt your transmission like, I don't know, 5 times in the past 20 years, your bore might be a little worn out. But even if it isn't wore out, this is a great measure with these seals to keep it from wearing out altogether. And this will ensure an optimum band apply. Another small nuance in this is your little E-clip. That's why I had it on here, was just to check how tight this clip was. That's extremely important. These can pop off. There's not much to them. So your servo's a major part, and it's a lot of small pieces, but incredibly important to check over. Sonex has put an O-ring on here. Normally you wouldn't put any assembly lube on the middle of the shaft to slide it up through the second servo, but in this case you sort of have to. We have your return spring, stock washer, an E-clip, and check your action. Nice and smooth, okay? I do like to put a small amount of assembly lube on the pin itself that actually slides into the bore. I try to just lube everything kind of where it needs to before we run it on our dyno. We ease it in on our dyno, so it's not like a shock, you know, or anything like a car normally would. But just to prevent any wear that might happen in between, always grease your stuff. And our return spring. Now, the band clearance is something I kind of did. I've ground enough pins to kind of guess where it ought to be, but I never actually set it up. So I may have to make an adjustment, I may not. It's the only thing I didn't do prior. So without your O-ring, force servo in. Clamp. All right. Now we have our clip, and all you're going to do is basically check your clearance without the O-ring. So put the clip in. And I do believe I have to grind a little more off the pin, but we are almost there. We're close. So I'm going to take a very minute amount off the pin. Probably 10 thousandths or so. When you're doing your band clearance like I am right now, and you're grinding your pin, especially the Sonax pins, they make them extra long for a reason. They are really meant as a fix and not so much as a performance part, I guess. But a little goes a long way. So when you're doing this, even though you may have this much room till you can get your clip in, about a quarter of that on the pin ground down is actually what it's going to take. It's just it's very weird how it works, but it does work that way. Make sure our spring's in place and we go back in with it. Gold washer, important with the Sonax Super Hold servo. And our clip. I do believe our little bit of grind went a long way. Gorgeous. As you can see, you may not be able to see the clearance that well, but as you can see, we have a very nice free moving motion with our drum. Another way you can tell if your band's actually too tight is, I'll show you a little bit later, when we flip it over you'll spin the output shaft, and you should be able to do it very easily by hand, and it should actually make a revolution or so. Okay, now what we're doing, I'm going to put the O-ring on. The reason I don't put this on to do the clearance, it's a pain to take out. You're going to sacrifice your O-ring probably, because that's what you have to do to get it out. It sort of helps hold it in there, per se. Okay, just wipe my grease off it, and there we go. We have a really nice clearance. Beautiful red servo. Free action there. And that brings us to the heart and soul, the pump. Okay, we have the pump here, and this is pretty much entirely the hydraulic system. This really, none of this does, even the valve body. This is the hydraulics. This feeds the oil, everything. And this is probably, in my opinion, the most important part of the transmission. Every little nuance must be taken into account with this. We have flexibility here and here and here, not here. At all. One of the biggest things is this surface here and here must be flat. I've seen some anywhere from bad machining jobs to just old age, but overall it's important to make sure this is flat. It's important to modify the pressure in it, which we do heavily. This is next to the valve body, and the reason why I don't talk about them so much is because this is heavily modded, and you can't just, you know, throw a pump in our unit and expect it to work, or any unit really. It's got to be done just like this, heavily modded, and very unique to us. A couple small things. The slide here has an O-ring underneath it, and it must be replaced. This basically holds your pressure. It's important that the slide is a little higher up than the actual surface, and it does compress. It just creates a tight seal for the actual pressure that's being made inside. Then we have our Teflon or rubber spring and pin that are already in here. I'll give you a look at that up top here. Good clean surfaces, new bushing, very nice. The other thing that we do with every 4L60, even our 200, 4R, and 700, we upgrade everything to a 13 vane rotor. And it's just a stock OEM rotor, 13 vanes, pumps a little bit more volume than a 7 or a 10, but there's no reason to see these break. I mean, we have used them over 1,000 horsepower every single build, and you know, they are still out there, and I just don't get why more people don't use the 13s. This should see no load. Line pressure shouldn't be breaking it or any of those absurd things. It's just there. It floats and it pumps, and as long as you have your converter spacing right, you didn't cheap out on the flex plate, you just nipped it in the butt and took care of it. Excuse me. There's no reason why your pump should fail on you. Another important thing here is the screen catches any debris that might be in the converter or flowing through, or let's say your lockup clutch comes apart. You'll also lose pressure if you don't have the screen in. So, in short, I have some pump parts here. And we have a guide washer that only goes on one way. Your guide rings. You're going to assemble this just like that. Place it down below. Then we have our slide spring, which needs to be I pry it in with a screwdriver. It's the only way I know how to assemble it. Can be a little bit tricky. You'll just work the spring in there. Then we have our vanes here, and these just simply slide in. And when you're doing your pump, it's important that you know, these little square guys, they can actually see wear and tear. So it's important that you inspect those as well. You can tell if they're worn out, trust me. So here we have our 13 vane pump, heavily modded. Everything has a nice tight fit. You can see I'm trying to move it nice and tight. spins free. This is going to pump optimal fluid for Gene for hopefully many years. Much like any oil pump, it's never a good idea to just install it dry. So a little bit of transmission oil. Do not use blue grease in this. It'll just lock it down, or it could probably break it, but a little bit of transmission oil will help the initial pickup, and you know, because this is the first thing that'll spin, and it'll just prevent any wear and tear that would occur on your brand new install. After we're done loading it up with a little fluid, we have our valve train in the body, heavily modified per our specs, and we're ready to piece it together. This is going too smooth. When I do this, I simply pick a spot that matches up on either side, and use that as my reference point when trying to tell what's front and back and all that. So the next thing we're starting to get at is alignment. A good pump alignment. It's that last step in making sure this is going to work as flawlessly as we are designing it to do. The alignment plays two roles. It prevents cross leaks within the pump body, because that can be done pretty easily, and then it prevents any cross leak or installing or removing issues here. But cross leaks, they're going to be your biggest enemy in any transmission build, because they're like what I would refer to as a ghost. Hard to find, if not impossible. What I do here is just snug up the bolts. That way we can move around a little bit, get our halves lined up. We carefully remove it, put it down, and tighten them up real good, and then we go into installing it. So to get the two halves lined up, I like to stick anything in here. You could use a bolt or a screwdriver, it doesn't matter, just something to keep it stationary, and then you'll use a hammer or something. I like doing it this way. I get a lot of crap for it. I know there's special tools, but they are a pain and I don't like using them. This tends to provide me with some better results. And it's a little bit easier. See, we're starting to get a very nice alignment right now just by lightly tapping it back and forth different ways. You can just move the pump. My hands are slippery. Right now I can't grab anything. So very carefully, two hands on it, pry it out or pull it out. Keep one hand on it at all times and give it a good wrench down. and then a little grease. I am going to be using some scarf cut rings on the stator, and the grease inside the grooves helps it stick together. I got to grab those. Okay, here's our scarf cut rings here. Then our washer. Helpful tip, a little PB blaster on your gaskets. If you are ever pulling one back apart, this is a godsend because this will keep all the gaskets from sticking. So spray your front and back with a little bit of PB. And you won't have to use a razor blade or anything if you are taking this apart and you have to you tear it on accident or it's just old and used. You know what I mean? And then have our O-ring. Okay, a little grease around the pump. Beautiful. Okay, same procedure here as we just did. Drop it in. I like to use this as a guide. Nice snug fit. The next step is our pump bolts. Now these little O-rings under here, very important to make sure you have those on it. You'd hate to be, you know, just put in your transmission, drive your car, and then it starts leaking fluid, and you can't tell if it's in the front seal or up front, and here it's just a silly little O-ring leaking out one of the bolt holes. That's one of those ghosts I talk about. That would drive somebody nuts. So important to make sure all your O-rings are here. Onto that topic, to prevent leaks, some of you may notice I'm using a little bit later of a style case with a earlier O-ring pump, and I'm actually going to put a compression seal in this also, and that's kind of a special double seal that I've been doing recently. Then we'll do this in a star formation. What's up, Frank?
I'm just going to stand back here and make faces at you while you're doing that.
Frank's making my job hard. Frank's our other builder. Everybody builds well, I actually build alongside of him, but back to Alan Gino's tranny here. Enough about me and Frank. We have our double seal. Really nice little add-on, little bonus. You can see we got another thing to do is, you know, move your shaft around in your stator. Since I put new bushings in this unit, that's without a question, but it is something that you should be looking for. something that is definitely overlooked. The lockup O-ring, extremely easy to tear when putting in your converter. Exercise some caution there, be gentle with it. We have our front pump seal. I can assure you that was luck. And our front seal retainer, and it does go on a certain way. The little tab here goes in between these sections. That about does it for the body, the hydraulic system, and now we're moving on to the valve body. Just a couple things I want to go over real quick. Some of the points I was talking about before, the band clearance, and just these little touches that make our unit so well made, it can withstand just about anything. And it just comes down to little touchy things like clearances, you know, what you're doing in here, how you did the hydraulic system. And I just want to show you that. See if I can get my hands out of the way fast enough. That is a beautiful band clearance. If you could see that, it does about a revolution or so. That's your band not being too tight, but very much tighter than the factory clearance. And your factory clearance is ridiculous. It just kind of hangs and flops in there. It's amazing that it even applies. So we have our front, or I'm sorry, another way to check your band clearance. Another thing that I like to look at is just check the front. You know, you can't really mess up there, but this you definitely could if you got your band too tight. This would be locked down if there was anything wrong, or extremely hard to turn. Now we're getting to the goody-goody. Some of the small things is the linkage shaft here, and the little check ball. This is for second gear, and if you leave this out, you will have a shift from hell, I promise you. I know this isn't the OEM way, but this is one of our mods we do. It's pretty well known. We flip this piston over, bypasses it, still lets AFL oil flow, and firms up the fourth gear shift a little bit. It's a good, simple way to really strengthen fourth gear a tad, and it doesn't damage the case or anything, and can be reversed if you don't like it. We do this to every build. Now we will be installing our valve plate and valve body. Already done it, and that's how it's always going to be. This is something that makes us very unique to everybody else, and a lot of our success due to the unit, much like the pump, and just simply how we go over everything inside here and set things up. We do not use a generic or big company shift kit. We really, like I said, generic. So for every build, we actually kind of come up with our own, depending on what you have, even as simple as two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, because yes, it does matter. Me and Frank here will decide what we think works best for you, and we'll build it accordingly. Needless to say, it will be unique to your vehicle. However, you could put it in something else and it would probably work just wonderfully, but we design these per customer, per gear ratio, per this, per that. So what makes us unique is truly not about what we do, but the customization that we do. And that's pretty much Performabuilt right there. we take it all into account. So I've selected, drilled my holes, and did a couple other things to this valve plate and everything to suit Gene's 373s, his new 6-pinion, you know, the weight of the car, etc. As you can see, I already have my gaskets on it. We'll just set that down like so. A couple bolts just to help keep it in place, make sure we don't get any cockeyed gaskets. It's, I guess you would say, similar, a little bit more complicated than the pump alignment. You're just, in essence, making sure no cross leaks, no tears, nothing's feeding another clutch set that shouldn't, causing a bind up, etc. So merely those couple bolts that you put in will save you a lot of stress. And then another point of interest, I've also set up a Gene's second accumulator, or Alan's second accumulator here to suit what I think he ought to have. Alrighty, next up, simple as making sure all your check balls are in place, bolting it down, then we'll test it, ship it, and Alan can go drive it, beat the snot out of it. Now in the 4L60, all the check balls are in the valve body and only one in the case. A little bit different on the 700. I'll do another video on that. Oh, sometime. If somebody orders the 700, maybe I'll make it a special point. That being said, also, if you order a transmission and you would like to see your product being built, just simply ask. It's as easy as that. No extra charge, nothing. Just keep in mind, just give me an extra day, you know, to put everything together and work with us on time is all we ask. But we'd be more than happy to show you what we're doing here for you. So just some assembly grease, lock the balls in, that way none of it rolls everywhere. I know that's the big fear on the valve body. As soon as you take it apart, everybody thinks a bunch of springs and balls are going to go flying everywhere, and that's really not really true, but it's funny to think about. So we have a couple updates and everything here. It's important to clean your valves, you know, take this thing apart. Solenoids, if you're going to reuse them, test them at the very least. If not, install new ones. If you're reusing them, O-rings, metal pistons, metal piston, metal piston, metal piston, forward, second, fourth. That's important. These plastic ones that are originally in it, they crack usually, or they just, you know, the heat shrinks them and they just never work right. It was a horrible idea. So, other than that, a couple of the basics there. Throw this bad boy on. Before I hear about it, No, I don't use alignment dowels. I think it's a waste of time. If you can't just be careful, you shouldn't be doing this. So just be very nice and gentle with this. I like that first bolt, keeps everything held down. Don't appear to, just inspect before you go any further, double check, make sure you didn't forget anything. So all in all, we're good. Start doing the pressure manifold switch. These are technically the bolts you would want to tighten first, especially this guy right here. These would, once you tighten these down, they would kind of align everything in a more, I don't know, microscopic sense, I guess. They would actually align it sort of for you with two short bolts. Three long 8mm, which they do go right here. Any other place would simply lock the unit down. Our two short 8s. And if you're one of those guys that's losing your 10mm all the time, this transmission will be a nightmare for you because everything's 10mm just about in it. So maybe stock up on those if you're trying this. Okay, just once over. Because let me tell you, it is a pain if you strip one. Guess I missed that one. Oh. Bad bolt. My bolt had a messed up thread on it, but we have fixed that, and now a little grease around our TCC solenoid O-ring. Plug it into the EPC, pressure manifold, shift solenoids, 3-2 down, and the PWM. I always thought it was funny, a fun little prank, maybe not harmless, but fun if you switch the shift solenoid plugs. Could be a common mistake, could be a funny prank. Don't really know what would happen, but I'd love to watch somebody do it. All right. Then these wiring harnesses tend to be a little stiff. They may not sit perfectly, but there we go. Alan, Gino, your unit. Beautiful valve body, beautiful harness, beautiful job, pump, perfect end play, perfect clutch clearance, and signed by myself. Take a lot of pride in my work, so really appreciate you guys watching again, and I'm sorry if that wasn't as detailed as I'd like it to be, but if you guys have some suggestions or something maybe you'd like to see us do, get a little more involved, or a different transmission, let me know. You can reach me through Facebook, my email, or the phone itself. So, Alan, Gino, hope you enjoy it. Guys, thank you for watching. This is Ryan from Performabuilt. Thank you so much. And